Hello everyone, it's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and today we're going to be talking about the Urusov Gambit. The Urusov Gambit starts out as a bishop's opening, so e4, e5, and now instead of white's main move knight f3, white just plays bishop to c4, developing a piece. And there aren't too many original lines in the bishop opening. For example, after knight c6, white could just play knight f3, getting an Italian game. Or if black played knight f6, attacking this pawn, white will usually just defend it with something like knight c3, getting a Vienna game. But in the Urusov Gambit, white is going to meet knight to f6 with pawn to d4. So here is our starting position, and black has to choose which pawn they want to take, if any. Knight takes e4 is not such a great idea from black. White can just play d takes e5, and now there's already threats of, for example, queen d5, threatening checkmate and the knight at the same time. Depending on what black does, white could even play bishop takes f7 first, and then meet king takes f7 with queen d5, forking the king and knight. This is already a pretty precarious position here for black, so black should probably not go for this line. Instead, after d4, black's main move is e takes d4. And here, if white recaptures the pawn, then black gets to play knight c6 with tempo. That's considered pretty good for black. You might be thinking e5. This is kind of the natural way to handle this in openings like the Scotch Gambit. But this also is not good for white here. Black can play d5. That's their usual answer in the Scotch Gambit as well. In fact, this is a position from the Scotch Gambit, except knight f3 and knight c6 have not been played yet. And it turns out that greatly favors black here. White can't really play their main move from the Scotch Gambit bishop b5 right here. Black's just going to save their knight, play knight f to d7, and white's not really even ready to take here with the knight on d4, and this knight could even take here on e5 in some lines. For example, after queen takes d4, black could just play c6, among other things, and after the bishop retreat, let's say bishop to d3, black could play bishop c5. This is not a very good line for white at all. So instead, after d4, e takes d4, white's best move is surprisingly just knight to f3. White's just developing a piece and letting black take the second pawn if they want it here with knight takes e4. Now, I should point out that black can decline this gambit. They don't have to take on e4. And if they're going to decline, they usually do so by playing knight to c6. And this is actually the starting position for the Scotch Gambit. I covered this position in my video on that opening, so I'll go ahead and put a link to that down in the description. Just keep in mind that if you're trying to play the Urusov Gambit with white, you have to be ready to play the Scotch Gambit as well. I'll just briefly show the transposition. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, we have a Scotch game, and after e takes d4, bishop c4, it's the exact same position as this one, after knight f6 is played by black. But let's take a look at what happens if black does not decline the gambit. So after knight f3, what if black takes our pawn here and plays knight takes e4? Now white can play queen takes d4, winning one of their pawns back and attacking that knight. If the knight retreats back to f6, white can play bishop g5. White's just developing as actively as possible here. And computers tend to like black's position because black's up a pawn and white really doesn't have any concrete threats yet. But in practice, white has scored pretty well from this position. For only being down one pawn, white's getting a pretty big lead in development here. Bishop e7 can be played to break that pin, and now just knight c3. And white wants to castle next turn to the queen side and put their rooks on the d and e files in a lot of lines. Now black has a choice. Knight c6 looks like a very logical move, just developing a piece and attacking that queen. But now white will often just play queen to h4 and still castle long next turn, castles queen side here, and black still looks to be under a lot of pressure. Rook h to e1 is coming. If the king castles here, this bishop could drop back to d3 and target the h7 pawn. There could be some removing the defender ideas here. Knight d5 could be an idea, especially if the king stays in the center. And white's getting some good play here. So instead, going back here after knight to c3, we looked at knight c6. Black's other most popular move is to play c6, just trying to take the d5 square away from the knight, and possibly trying to play d5 next, claiming some space there in the center, shutting down this bishop, and opening a line for black's light squared bishop. Of course, the downside for black is that this move c6 does not develop a piece, and that could increase white's lead in development even more. White's going to castle queenside, and after d5, white actually does not have to move this bishop right away. White can just play rook h to e1, pinning this bishop, and of course d takes c4 is not possible because of queen takes d8 checkmate. I found one line here that I really liked that illustrates how white can use this lead in development to get a really good position. So bishop e6 is one of black's most popular moves here, just reinforcing the d5 pawn, shutting down the e file here, and developing another piece. Now white can play queen to h4, just swinging their queen over to the king side, and now letting the rook pin this pawn to the queen, so the bishop is still immune here. Black can play knight b to d7. That looks like the most logical move, just developing their last minor piece, reinforcing the f6 knight, and breaking the d-file pin, so you might think that white finally has to save this bishop here. But it turns out that's not the case. White can just play knight to d4, keep this attack going. Every single move white's playing is really adding to this attack they're building, and it's still very dangerous for black to take this bishop. I'll show two possible lines here to illustrate the danger that black is in. So of course taking the bishop is a very critical try. Black is winning a piece here, so we have to at least look at it. But now comes knight takes e6, bishop takes f6, and now what does black play here? If black plays bishop takes f6, now comes rook takes e6 check. The king should probably not come to f7, because then queen takes c4 could be played, and that king is going to have to move again. So king to f8, and now just queen to f4. And white is down a piece here, but white has all kinds of threats. Rook d6 is a threat, attacking this pinned knight again. Knight e4 is a possible idea, coming to attack this pinned bishop. And perhaps most importantly, the black pieces are just really tied up. We see how uncoordinated black is here with the rooks being disconnected, the king not able to castle. Where can this queen really go? This is actually a very good position for white, despite being down a piece. So instead, going back here a few moves, after white takes here on f6, instead of taking with the bishop, black's only other option is to take with the g-pawn, but now this really exposes this king even more. White can play queen h5 check here, just making sure the black king can't castle. King f8 is forced. And as far as I can see, this particular line, with g takes f6, has never been tried in practice. Computers think that black has chances to defend here, but in a practical game, I'd probably much rather be white here. This seems pretty tough for black to defend long term. White has ideas to lift some rooks up, to give this check whenever white needs to, and white's going to get a good game here as well. So coming back here after knight b to d7 and knight to d4, we saw what happens if black takes the bishop here. White's just going to take on e6 and then take on f6 and get a very strong attack. So what happens if black does not take that bishop yet? What if black just castles? In this position, white will often sacrifice the exchange by playing rook takes e6, removing that key defender here from black. And the point is, after f takes e6, knight takes e6, white wins a pawn there, and they're going to get the exchange back because they're forking the queen and rook. One game here continued with queen e8, knight takes f8, queen takes f8, and now finally this bishop has to save itself. It swings back to d3, helping to target this h7 square here. And the material here is actually equal. Black should be okay if they play properly. The game's probably roughly equal here. But in the only game I found that reached this position, white went on to win the game. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please click that link down in the description to visit chesspathways.com right now and get signed up. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, and all you need is an email address. When you join, I'll send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking, and I'll make sure you never miss out on any new content. So please let me make sure that you become the best chess player you can be and join our community. Thanks, and I'll see you there.